Hey everybody, I'm so happy to be here with the wonderful, the great, the luminous Ashley C. Ford. Don't forget the C. The C is for champion. Don't forget the C. Ashley C. Ford. Before we get started, I just want to reiterate just a few things that are very important to me. Number one, we love you. We know you love us, especially Ashley. But if you really love us, we know you're here to support, but show your support through your dollars. It is what it is. I don't have no problems and no shame in saying it. Do it for Books of Magic. Buy the book from Books of Magic and make sure you buy the book if you can. I mean, it matters that Ashley gets an opportunity to continue to do this work. And in order for that to happen, we got to sell these books. And that just is what it is. Real spill. But other than that, please put your questions in the Q&A. This is always a conversation. This is family time. It ain't gonna be a whole bunch of lecturing. Ain't gonna be a whole bunch of stiff stuff. We don't get down like that. This family time. Put your questions in the Q&A. We'll get to it in a second. I'm gonna ask some questions. I love to go first when it comes to people's tours, because I get to set the bar, and also but it also is complicated because I can't spoil the book, and so my questions are going to be a little broad because it's the beginning of the week. By Friday, whoever you got on at the end of the week gonna be asking pointed questions because people don't read the book. So I'm just going to ask for it's going to be some lobs basically. Okay. Mm-hmm. My first question. Great. First of all, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for reading it. Thank you for being here. You know, I'm a huge Jason Reynolds fan. Anytime I've gotten the opportunity to talk with you, interview you, read your work, I take that opportunity and I take it seriously. So it means a lot that you're here with me tonight.
You've been very kind to me over the years. I'm grateful for you. Thank you so much. Here's where I want to start. I want to start at sentence number 1. Okay. Chapter 1, sentence 1. This is what it says. It says, just remember, you can always come home. I always tell everybody I talk to about their work that I always believe that there is a single sentence in the book that encapsulates the entire thing, right? And to me, you happen to choose the first sentence, right? Like this sentence to me is the book, right? This is the book. And so I guess I just want you, and it means many, 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 many things. The idea of return, the idea of, a voyage, the idea of pilgrimage, the idea of what it means to come back to something that is familiar, even if that thing is complicated, right? And so I guess I just want you to talk a little bit about this first line, right? This idea of returning home. You can always come home. What does it mean to you? How does it color the book? Why did you choose it as the first line?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it changes over time, and it has changed over time, what it meant to me to hear someone say, you can always come home, not just because my definition of home has changed, but also because my understanding of what that invitation means has changed. And I think that plays out over the course of the book, where, my idea of home initially is pretty static, pretty standard, and then it is very quickly complicated. And I think that happens to most of us. Like, I think that happens to everybody, that at some point, our idea of home is going to get complicated because for the most part, we don't define home as something within ourselves. We define it as something out in the world. And I think the closer I got to defining home as something inside me instead of something outside of me, the more home became something that I understood as a place that I could always return to. Always. But that wasn't always the case. There was some time when I thought home wasn't where I could return to. There was a point where I thought home would never be where I would want to return to. And all of that was really just about my relationship with myself. It was just about my relationship with what was going on inside of me. But you have to learn that. You have to figure that out. And I did.
Yeah, there's so much. This is going to be one of these moments where I'm going to be really pissed that we just don't have enough time. We'll get drinks at some other time.
Yes, come here. We're going to Bluebeard.
That's my jam. That's my jam. I'm coming. Are you familiar with the idea of the fugue state?
Yes.
So my mom used to always talk about how the fugue state, the way that fugue state is usually described as sort of this weird sort of liminal space where, you know, like it's even complicated to describe, actually. It's just it's a weird sort of static, strange sort of space. And my mother used to always say, and we're not religious folks, but my mom used to always say, it's the fugue state is typically the essence of you trying to return to itself.
I would absolutely agree with your mom on
Right?
that.
Like this, and,
Yes.
you know what I
Yes.
mean? Like there's like that thing in you is trying to get back to you.
Yes.
Right? Like
I've definitely, I think, in the book, one of the things that comes up quite a bit is dissociation and going away
yeah.
in a certain sense when being here, being in reality feels like too much. And I dissociated a lot as a kid, though I wouldn't have known to call it that. But when people would ask me, or when I would wonder to myself, like, where was I? Where did I go? Like, what just happened? You know, and I started paying attention to it. I realized that where I was going felt like a place that I had built inside of me, a place that I had built in my mind to remind me who I was and what I believed and what I hoped and all of those things. You know, I grew up and, you know, we're not that far apart in age, but I definitely grew up in that time when all of the films and television shows, quite often when you got to like the moral of a story, when it included adults, that adult had to remember who they had been as a child. I think about, you know, as just like an example, the movie Hook.
Ugh,
In Hook,
so
you
underrated.
know, so underrated, but I love Hook,
Goofy,
right?
yo,
Right? Yeah.
goofy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I love that movie. But even as a kid, I was watching that movie and I was thinking, oh, adults forget how to be kids.
Mm-hmm.
They forget who they were as a kid, and that separates them from magic.
Yes.
And I believed in magic, and I did not want to be separated from magic. I did not want to forget who I was to a point that I started to treat people the way I had been treated at my most harmed.
Yeah.
I was afraid that I would turn into what I feared if I didn't hold on to that child place. And I think that's why some part of me sort of made that place to go.
Yo, so like, I'm glad you said that, because one of the most incredible parts, I think about like the first third of the book, so much of it is about you as a little girl, like a child. And even though life is wavy around you,
Yeah.
but at least the way it's written here, the childness shines through. The idea of thinking about magic and searching for it. I mean, even talking about these TV shows and how they all, at the beginning of the theme song, they all had the sun rising or the sun setting, and your just the obsession you had with, like, you wanted to see this, right? Like with your own eyes, you wanted to catch the sun. And I read that and I'm like, God, this is, though life is life around her, but this is, she can't, somehow she's holding on to the parts of her that make her a child, but also around the sunset and the sunrise that made me also think about the passage of time, right? The consistency that time is moving, right? Like this thing is happening, right? Whether it be you as a child going through life, whether it be Pop sort of in the box, right? And dealing with that, right? This idea that, like, I need to see this thing that they keep telling me is there. I need to see the magic that they keep saying is there. I see it on TV, right? Right? Can you just talk a little bit about just that whole motif, and that just, it's beautiful actually, but it also just made me, even in the midst of, because the story is, there are parts of the story that I think are absolutely gorgeous, and there are parts of the story that are tough, right? And but this moment in the midst of a lot of toughness, I thought was just, I mean, it's making me emotional now. It seems salvific in an interesting way.
I think that when we are children, we are more deeply connected to the part of us that sort of like remembers where and how we come. into this world, right?
Mm.
And I think that when you are a child, the things that amaze you and that make you feel a sense of like awe and curiosity, the things that you do kind of want to chase and follow, are like these little clues that come from inside us about what we are meant to do, what we are meant to be, what we are meant to like. I think, we can't really know what our lives are going to look like as adults. And I don't think we should have to, but I think we have all these little suspicions
Mm.
about who we are and about where we come from. And because we are still so closely connected to like that source, um, it's a little easier for our bodies and our minds to just move in the direction of our interests and motivations, the ones that we kind of naturally come with. And I think that as a kid, I was fascinated by not just the passage of time, but by markers of time.
Mm.
I was fascinated by birthdays and holidays and the moon and the sun and when the animals came out and when they went away. I was always so aware of that. And I felt like the noticing it was the beauty in it. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't question that for all of my childhood. It took a really long time for that to sort of be redirected in me. But it also just never worked out. I was really, really bad at pretending I was interested in things that I wasn't interested in.
Mm.
My sense of curiosity and my sense of like, no, that's what I like as a kid was so strong.
Yeah.
Um, and the more, even as an adult, the more I get to know myself, the more I sort of reach back and hold the hand of like that child self, the more I realize that like those things aren't different now. They're the same. It's just that they've been coded by society in a certain way. So I might think of myself as like, oh, she just can't focus. But it's like, no, I just can't focus on what you want me to focus on all the time.
Yeah.
I'm really good at focusing on what matters to me.
Right. I tell people all the time that like every day I wake up, I go and I chase my 13-year-old self down. And
Yes.
I wrangle them down. For the rest of my life, it is frowned. Perhaps I won't. I'm old, right? I'm getting older, right? I'm almost 40. I don't know if I want to be childish, but I always want to be childlike
Yes.
forever.
Yes.
Forever.
Childish is, I think when we say someone's childish, what we're usually saying is that they're emotionally immature.
Exactly.
They need some more training emotionally. They need some better definitions for their feelings and ways of processing them, right? But childlike is about tapping into that curiosity.
It's magic.
It's remembering who you are, really. Like it's not deciding to be something different. It's not deciding to be a new way. It's remembering what always mattered to you,
That's it.
what always lit you up inside.
That's
And
it.
then letting that take you for a ride, which for people like us tends to turn out really well.
That's it. Imagine being wide-eyed your whole life. That sounds great. I mean, I
Yes.
got the tattoo on my hand is a number 26. I do it. This is how I honestly feel. Tattoo on my hand is a number 26. And the reason why is because I get so excited at the mere thought that I get 26 letters to rearrange in some strange sequence that might be able to make somebody laugh or make somebody, that's it. And to me, that is alchemy. That's magic. Right. And it gets me like wildly frantic. I'm like,
yes, because how many people really get the opportunity to connect with so many people this way through storytelling?
Yeah.
Like everybody, I think can have a story. Everybody is a little bit of a storyteller in their own right. Whether or not they choose to develop that, whether or not they have the interest to develop that is, their own prerogative. But it feels like a gift every day that this is what I do. And that the way people react to my gift quite often is with honest and vulnerable opportunities to connect with them
That's it.
or see them or to just let me know that they see me. And that is so powerful. It is so powerful. And so, you got to be responsible with that power. And I really, really do try to be, but you don't choose it. Like, it's not something that you choose. It's just something that you do. And hopefully it works out.
That's what's up. All right. So look, I'm always fascinated by entomology. I'm like an entomologist.
Me too.
Yeah. And so I was doing some, actually, so it's funny because I was doing some research on the word memoir, right? Because what we know of memoir, we know what memoir is now, the way that we have sort of socialized it, right, and colloquialized it. It is sort of a recount of one's memories, right? But memoir in the 15th century, when the word first popularized and the form first popularized, was actually writing something so that it would be remembered. And so my question to you is, if as now that this thing that has been written to be remembered, right? And you have all this stuff in your book about the creation, like the making of a memory, right? Which I do want you to touch on. But I also want to know, just hypothetically, if this is to be remembered, who are you leaving it for?
I'm leaving it for everybody who has been a child. Every single person who has been a child, because we all have been children, every single one of us. And the way we feel about our child self, the way we were taught to feel about our child self, we will carry that with us for the rest of our lives. And it will color the way we fear. It will color the way we love. It will absolutely influence the ways we believe we are connected to other people and the ways that we don't. And I think if more people understand that childhood is not a time that gets wiped away when we turn 18, nobody hits a button that causes a reset. And now, we did all that training, but this is the real stuff. And this is the only stuff that counts. No, everything that happened before that moment counted. And children don't need perfect adults in their life. They don't need perfect parents. They don't need perfect aunts and uncles. They don't need perfect adults in their community. What children need are great examples of how to process the imperfections of humanity in themselves and in other people. And they are only going to get that if they see adults admitting when they're wrong, apologizing when they're wrong, and then doing something to make amends when they've done something wrong.
That is a word. Jesus. Yeah, I hear you on that one. Lord knows, I feel like all of us have been at some point. I talk to these youngers all the time, and by the time a shorty is like 8, they've already been disappointed. And my job isn't to, and that disappointment is real, right? And they deserve to own, that. They deserve to own that feeling and to own that disappointment.
Absolutely.
But our jobs, as you said, our jobs is to help them process that. Because inevitably what happens is we all get older, and hopefully, most of the time we get older, and you realize that that your imperfect parents or your imperfect coaches or your imperfect teachers are human beings.
Just people.
There's a whole
just
trail.
People too.
They're just people. There's a whole trail of life that came before you got here.
Yep.
And it colors them. And unfortunately, my daddy always said, son, in order for you to live a life that is wholly yours, you will have to hurt some people. There will be some casualties.
Yes, that is absolutely true.
Just atone.
You make amends.
You atone, right? Like,
it's all you can do. It's the only option for what you can do in those situations. And you also have to understand that when you go to make amends, when you go to atone, it's not anybody's job to forgive you.
Nobody.
It's not anybody's job to accept you the way you want to be accepted in that moment. People need time. People have their own boundaries, and they need their own processes. Yeah. And it's the hardest thing in the world to not take it personally, because we don't have any practice, and in a lot of cases have never seen anybody else in the practice of not taking it personally.
Exactly. It's like at the end of the day, don't nobody owe you forgiveness.
Right.
No one owes it. I bumped it. This is years ago. I was talking to Trayvon Martin. This is a
Yes.
very
Yes.
Trayvon Martin's father, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at this thing I was at, they said, "Do you forgive George Zimmerman?" He said, "Listen, I'm a Christian man, and God says I'm to forgive, but God ain't say when. It might not be in this lifetime."
Mm-hmm.
That's real.
Mm-hmm. That is absolutely real.
That's real.
That's absolutely real. And you've got to let people have that. You've got to let people have their own processes. You don't get to say, if you don't forgive me, then I'm going to feel bad. If you bring this up, if you talk about it, then I'm going to feel bad. It's like, it's okay for you to feel bad.
It's
okay. Which is what I tell people quite often. I just say, I know that this makes you feel bad. And while that was not my intention, I think it's okay. And I know you're going to make it to the other side of that.
Absolutely.
And we're going to be okay.
Absolutely. I got 8 minutes. I'm going to ask quick questions. This is a terrible setup. I love y'all Books of Magic, but goodness gracious, we should have got 2 hours.
I love it.
You know,
next time.
Next time. So first of all, and to the people who are watching, you got to read the book to understand the context of this question. And honestly, I would tell you, but I don't want to ruin the experience of you reading the book. But is your grandfather who tried to give you the weed for your graduation present still alive? Because I love him.
Yes.
He's my favorite person in the whole book.
Yes. Yes, he absolutely is. Still kicking, probably driving a new Cadillac that he bought from somebody. Who knows? He's the man. Like he always been the man. He always gonna be the man. It's just nothing to be done about it.
He is the man in the book. The way you write him, and he's only there for a moment. He got a quick cameo. He's out of there. And his cameo in this book is basically at the graduation party, right?
Oh yeah.
Basically, it's like, hey, granddaughter, I got a little something for you. Boop, boop, boop. Opens his hand, got a nug in his hand. He goes some weed. And of course, as
and I'm like,
he's like, that's all.
At the time, I'm like, right? I'm like, come on, man, you trying to mess up my FAFSA? I gotta get this.
Yeah. He's like, this was your present. This was your present.
and that's a great moment in the book that actually is like a joke I used to do, but it was obviously like based on a true moment and a true story. And my grandpa is just, I have a family full of characters. I have a whole family full of characters, and there are a lot more grandpa stories that are very wild. I took it easy. Easy.
One of my favorite parts in the book, and I'm so happy to talk about this with you for a few seconds, is you write sex.
Yeah.
Which I always am. I just love people who write sex, specifically because I find that women write sex better. And after reading this book and thinking about all the things that I've been thinking about while reading this book, I often wonder if women write sex better because they know what they want, because they've already had what they don't. Because you know what I mean? Because so many women because so many women have had unconsensual sex.
Yes.
So many women have been assaulted. They've been all this stuff. Right? There's so much shit. There's so much stuff, right? And so I found your sex scene, a sex scene with your first love, right? Whom I also love in this story. As complicated as that all is, I loved him. His name is Brett. He's fantastic. And you do him, you give him his light, you know what I mean? But you all had this beautiful scene in the story. And I just, I don't know if this is even a question or if it's just me saying, like, I just thought it was absolutely, it was just a beautiful moment, the way that it's written. And I do want you to talk about, like, even just that moment, even writing sex, you know what I mean?
Well, I'll say really quickly, the reason why it was so important for me to write that scene, and I worked hard on it, I wanted it to be right, I wanted it to read right, was because I feel and have felt like I was inundated as a young woman of stories of sexual assault and women who just struggled for the rest of their lives to reclaim some sense of their sexual selves in the wake of being assaulted. And that is true for some women. They have that experience and they, you know, they need a certain kind of processing. They need a certain kind of path in order to get back to themselves. I needed the same thing, but it worked differently for me. Having two experiences that were so diametrically opposed to one another, I felt some guilt in that second experience, the sex scene you're talking about, because part of me thought, then did something bad really happen to me if I can enjoy this? Because everything I've seen told me that if I had been assaulted, that this would have been shut down for the rest of my life. And that wasn't true. And the older I got, the more I talked to other people who had been assaulted, I realized that for a lot of them, that wasn't true. We just didn't have stories that showed that. So I knew that that was something that I wanted to live in this book, was that opposition, that there is a big difference actually between these two things that are often conflated.
So good. Put your questions in the Q&A. We got three questions. We're going to get to them in this 1 second. Gosh, man, I didn't get to all my questions. Such a bummer. Because I also wanted to ask, because, you know, one of the most beautiful scenes in the entire book is when you finally get to go see your father.
Yeah.
The most tender moment in the book is in the penitentiary.
Yeah.
And there's so much wound up in that. And and actually a lot of your story is out, is out already, right? But I'm still just a little bit reticent to tell too much because I really want people to experience the story for the first time in case they don't know, in case they haven't read or have been around you or whatever.
Right.
But I don't even know how to ask it. It was just, I don't know, like to write the most tender scene that an adult, with you and an adult, is in a penitentiary with a man who has been convicted of a heinous crime.
Yeah.
And has been gone your whole life.
Yeah.
I guess I just want you to just touch on it a little bit. And then I got one more question, then we go to Q&A. But I can't, I would feel remiss to not at least bring this up because I think it's just, I wept like a baby.
We'll touch on it a little bit. I'll just say that, that moment was charged with so much emotion and so much expectation. The thing about that moment and about that scene of going to visit my dad is that, up until that point in my life, I thought my primary goal, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, was to not want. And to not get excited and to not have any desire or no hope for things that I could not ensure on my own. If I couldn't control all the elements to make sure it went the way I went, then I could not allow myself to hope because disappointment just felt too devastating for me. And going to see my dad was one of the first things I'd allowed myself to want in a really long time. And I think you feel that in the story, that it's a thing that both of us want to be together, but and to see each other in that moment. But it is a huge thing for me to have allowed myself to so clearly want that I ask for help, and that I also walk into this situation with my heart on my sleeve in a way that I can't control. Which was rare for me. Yeah. So that, I think that's why that scene plays out so intensely.
Such a cold place in such a warm moment.
Yeah.
The contradictions made for a visceral reaction for me. Like it just it's, for all of you watching, it's really something. My last question before we get to the few questions we have. Yeah. And I ask everyone this question, actually everybody, every single person that I talk to in terms of these books, I ask the same question. And I'm so curious to hear yours because I'm just curious. What would you thank your 10-year-old self for?
I would thank her so much for not being afraid to be strange. When I was 10 years old, my favorite writer was Edgar Allan Poe. And I was obsessed with The Raven.
Mhm.
And I was obsessed with The Telltale Heart. And there were just stories and poems that I read over and over and over. For a time, I could recite Annabel Lee at the drop of a hat. Um, and I loved that about myself, and I wouldn't let anybody take it from me.
Mm.
Even when they made fun of me for it, I thought, man, they are missing out because Edgar Allan Poe
Mark,
slaps. Like,
Mark the
yes.
Raven.
So 10-year-old me was deeply invested in letting herself love what she loves, um and she kept that for me, and I'm still able to go back and borrow that from her sometimes. So
Yeah,
yeah,
like we said at the beginning, right? You can always come back home.
you can always come back home.
You can always come back home. All right, let's get some questions. Let's see. Oh, this is a good one. Ashley,
Hmm.
I love the way you advocate for and respect children. Me too. I've heard you say that you go back and forth between wanting and not wanting kids of your own. If this isn't too
Hmm.
personal a question, would you mind sharing the reasons or moments that nudge you toward the having children camp?
Sure. um I deeply enjoy children, even in the moments when everyone else around me is starting to find them annoying. I still find them fascinating and want to talk to them about what they're thinking and what they're up to, even like the little weird stuff that I don't totally understand. It's
Right.
just wild to watch their brains work.
Oh,
So I think that the fascination and like the wanting to care for them, the wanting to like hold and wanting to show them things about how to be a person. Also, I think what nudges me towards that camp is that more and more I'm trusting myself to be a person who can allow a child to be whoever they are. And I just didn't and don't really want to bring a child into this world if I can't allow them that, and if I can't bring them up the way that not necessarily I hoped I would have been, like on a very specific level, but on a macro level of what I would want to be available to them in terms of, emotional maturity, obviously financial resources, things like that. It's becoming more and more possible.
mm,
So it's just
that's
one of those things. Yeah.
one of those
We'll
things.
see.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
Okay, and for everybody listening, I'm just going down the list. Don't be mad if we don't get to you. Just going in order, everybody. All right. Sheila asks, your stories are mesmerizing. They capture a reader and hold them for a long time. Whose writing is
Mhm.
capturing you right now? And what are you currently reading?
Well, I there's another book that's out today that I absolutely loved. It's called How the Word is Passed
Okay.
by Dr. Clint Smith.
Oh, yes, yes, Doctor.
Dr. Clint Smith. Got to put some respect on the homie's name.
He lives down the street
Um,
from me. I ain't calling that dude doctor
You're like, now that's how. See, that's how I know you getting up there because you already starting. Look, I ain't calling
oh,
him no doctor.
oh my God,
Clint
so
Smith.
persnickety. So
Well, his book is amazing. It is this amazing book where he travels across the country to these different historical sites, and he's wrestling with the story America tells about itself, or the United States tells about itself, versus some of the reality, especially as it pertains to race, slavery, and Jim Crow in this country. It is not just a book that after I finished it made me feel smarter. It also made me feel like I had read some of the most gorgeous sentences I'd ever read in my entire life, because he is this perfect mix of researcher and poet. And it's just
he's amazing.
amazing,
Yeah.
especially when it gets into the stuff about incarceration, which is obviously really important to me. Um, it's a brilliant book, and I want everybody to read it. So
Shout out to
yeah.
Clint. Hopefully he's in.
Also, Also, he's part of the bonus conversation on my audiobook. Clint and I did a bonus
Oh,
conversation at the end of it.
that's dope.
So get his book and then listen to our conversation. It's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Shout out Clint. Also, if y'all love poetry, read his poems. He's amazing.
Yes, yes.
Does everything. Him and Hanif, they do everything. It's weird. And Eve Ewing. It's
I'm
weird.
so tired of these people.
It's
Like,
weird,
they
man.
just
I do everything.
some of my favorite people in the world, right? But I'm like, if you write another thing that blows my mind, it's gonna
It's
be
so
me
weird.
and
I'm
you.
like, it's weird. I'm like, how do I know how to do all of it? That's weird.
It's because I can't.
Neither can I.
I can no. I got the
I do the best I can with what I got.
right.
All right. Katie says, I'm assuming at some point you felt you couldn't or shouldn't write this book or include certain information or stories. I'm curious, in those moments, what convinced you that you should? And do you feel the same today now that the book is out there?
I could only be convinced that it was my story to tell if I was in some way directly involved, or if it was information that indirectly affected my life in a way that was relevant and made sense in the story.
Hmm.
Anything else, I pretty much said that's unnecessary. I know what parts of my story belong to me. I had to really work on that. I had to work on trusting myself to know that, because other people aren't gonna, they can't tell you what parts of your story belong to you. You know what parts of your story belong to you. You know whether or not this is a story that you're like, oh, that might make for a good scene in the book, but is that mine to tell?
Hmm.
Is that my private thing to share? Is that my secret thing to share? Is that hard thing something that directly affected me, or is it something that happened over there and I just want to talk about it now because I can see how it works into the story?
Hmm.
I didn't want to do that. I really, really wanted to be fair to every human that shows up in my book, as much as I could be, because I felt by dishonoring their humanity, I would be dishonoring mine too.
Right.
And I don't do that. So I think I tried to keep it respectful. I tried to keep it honest. I tried to make sure nobody was purely a hero or purely a villain.
Right.
Everybody was just a person.
You nail it. I love this question. This might have to be the last question. Favorite phrase or saying that you say to your inner child?
Mm.
That's a good question.
The time I talk to my inner child, I guess, most would be when I'm feeling anxious and scared in a way that feels based in my past more than reality.
Mm.
And when I get to that place where I am scared or I'm anxious or I'm worried nobody likes me or people are looking at me and I'm not right, or whatever, I tell myself, you're scared because you think that if you've made a mistake or that if something's wrong right now, that makes you a mistake or that makes you wrong.
Mm.
And that's not true. And you're not alone. I will take care of you.
Amen. I had a therapist once tell me that the difference between guilt and shame is that guilt is feeling bad about something you did, and shame is feeling bad about someone you are.
Yes.
And
yes.
those two things are not the same. We should not conflate them ever.
We shouldn't. We shouldn't, because shame is corrosive.
It's corrosive. And you know what my saying to my younger self would be? It's probably, Jason, if you threw a party and invited everyone you knew, you would see the biggest gift would be for me. And the card attachment say, thank you for being a friend. There's a lot of Golden Girl references in the book, at least in the first third. You'll see when you read it. I'm a big fan of the Golden Girl. Shout out to Estelle Getty.
That's what I'm talking about.
Hey,
keep going,
man.
Betty White.
Listen, shout out to Betty White, still kicking. All right. Last question. We're going to get the last question from Sarah. You mentioned on the podcast recently, you intentionally wrote your characters as neither villains or heroes. As you just said, can you explain how you came to this decision? And you're like, when writing your memoir, how did you come to the decision to make sure that you were balanced in the way that you wrote them? And then she also said that she loved your book. I should make sure I put that in.
Thank you, Sarah. I came to that decision mostly because it occurred to me that a lot of my mental health issues and a lot of the things that I was struggling with were thinking of myself in any given moment as a hero or a villain, and having both of those things never be accurate because they never are. Superheroes are superheroes because they are superhuman. I am not. I am just a person like everybody else, which means that the extremes where some of those super abilities lie don't belong to me. I can't do those things, and most people can't. Most people don't. As I've gotten older, as I've met more people, interacted with more people, I cannot help but realize that my interaction with and of a person never sums up the whole of who they are. It never has, and it never will. And I just wanted to apply that in this book, in this story, not because I didn't want anybody to be mad at me, but because I wanted to tell the truth. And when you're telling the truth, including the humanity of the humans that you're writing about is necessary. So,
ladies and gentlemen, the wonderful, the great, the brilliant, everybody's friend in their mind, Ashley C. Ford.